Listen closely because I want to open your eyes to something most people are still sleeping on. Everyone talks about Bitcoin like it's the only ticket to freedom. Ethereum gets the hype for being programmable money. Ripple gets dragged through lawsuits but still makes headlines. But there's this one project, this one quiet giant that's moving differently. Stellar. XLM. And I'm telling you, if you're not paying attention, you could miss out on one of the biggest financial shifts of our lifetime. Now, let me start by asking you this. How many times have you heard somebody dismiss a coin just because it's old? Or because it doesn't get as much press anymore? People love chasing the shiny new thing, the meme coin that's pumping today, the project with hype influencers screaming its name. But the truth is, hype doesn't build lasting infrastructure. Real partnerships, adoption, and purpose do. And that's exactly where Stellar shines. See, what most people don't realize is that Stellar isn't trying to be Bitcoin. It's not trying to be Ethereum. It's not even trying to be Ripple. Stellar is in its own lane, focused on one thing: moving money instantly across borders at almost zero cost. And here's the kicker. It's already being used in places where traditional finance doesn't even bother showing up. Let me paint a picture. You live in a developing country, maybe somewhere in Africa, Southeast Asia, or South America. You've got family abroad, maybe working in Europe or the US, sending money home every month. Right now, if they use Western Union or MoneyGram, they're paying anywhere from 5% to 10% in fees. Sometimes even more, depending on the corridor. On a $200 transfer, that's $20 gone, money that could have bought food, medicine, school supplies. And you wait days for it to arrive. Now imagine doing the same transaction on Stellar. Costs a fraction of a penny. It settles in seconds. And the recipient doesn't need a fancy bank account. They just need access to a phone. That's not just a nice feature. That's life-changing. That's the difference between having enough to eat tonight or not. Between paying rent on time or being evicted. And don't just take my word for it. According to the World Bank, global remittances hit $860 billion in 2023, with low- and middle-income countries receiving over $600 billion of that. The average global cost of sending money was still hovering around 6.2%. Think about that. 6% on billions of dollars, skimmed off the top. That's a tax on the poor, plain and simple. And Stellar? Cuts that cost down to nearly zero. If that doesn't make you sit up, I don't know what will. But here's where it gets even crazier. Stellar isn't just a concept. It's not a white paper dream or some futuristic maybe one day promise. It's already running pilot programs with some of the biggest financial institutions in the world. IBM, for instance, has used Stellar's network for its world wire payment system. MoneyGram partnered with Stellar to allow people to convert cash into digital assets and back again in minutes. You can walk into a MoneyGram branch in certain countries, hand them cash, and within seconds have USDC, the regulated stablecoin, sitting in your Stellar wallet. That's not speculation. That's real adoption. Now, let me hit you with a rhetorical question. If Stellar can solve one of the biggest problems in global finance, the cost and friction of moving money across borders, why isn't it getting the same hype as Bitcoin or Ethereum? The answer is simple. Stellar isn't sexy. It's not the coin you brag about at parties. It's not promising to make you rich overnight with some 100x pump. Instead, it's quietly building the plumbing of the new financial system. And people rarely notice the plumbing until it stops working. Here's something to chew on. In 2024, the European Central Bank reported that nearly 13% of Eurozone adults are unbanked or underbanked. In developing regions, that number can shoot up to 40% or even higher. We're talking billions of people who either don't have a bank account, don't have access to credit, or can't trust their local currency to hold value. For these people, Stellar isn't just a nice-to-have, it's a lifeline. And don't underestimate that word, trust. Money at its core is trust. You trust that when you open your wallet tomorrow, the bills inside still buy the same amount of bread. You trust that when you send money to your cousin overseas, it'll actually arrive. You trust that the number in your bank app represents something real. But what happens when that trust is broken? Look at countries like Argentina, where inflation ran above 120% in 2023. Look at Lebanon, where the local currency lost over 90% of its value in just a few years. For people living in those realities, Stellar isn't about speculation. It's about survival. Now, I want you to notice something about the way Stellar approaches this whole problem. Unlike Bitcoin, it doesn't rely on energy-intensive mining. Unlike Ethereum, it doesn't choke on network congestion and sky-high gas fees. Stellar uses its own consensus protocol, Stellar Consensus Protocol (SCP), that's lightweight, fast, and cheap. We're talking transactions that settle in 2 to 5 seconds and cost fractions of a cent. That's not just efficient, it's scalable. And while most cryptos are fighting for relevance in the West, where, let's be real, most people still don't even understand what a blockchain does, Stellar is out there solving problems in the global South. It's like the difference between building a luxury sports car and building a reliable, affordable motorcycle. The sports car gets the headlines, but the motorcycle changes lives because people can actually use it every day. Now, let me hit you with a big one. You've probably heard about central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. Governments everywhere are experimenting with them. China has its digital yuan already in pilot. The EU is working on a digital euro. Nigeria has the naira. And guess what? Some of these pilots are running on Stellar's rails. That's right. While the crypto world is distracted with meme coins and speculation, Stellar is quietly positioning itself as the backbone for government-issued digital money. And here's the kicker. When a central bank decides to issue its currency on Stellar, do you think that might increase trust in the network? Do you think that might drive adoption? Of course it does. It's like if the US government suddenly said, hey, all treasury bonds will now be traded on Ethereum. That would be huge. Stellar is already making those kinds of moves, just not with the same marketing noise. But let me bring this back to you, the individual investor, the person trying to figure out whether Stellar is worth holding. Here's what I'd say. Stellar is not your get-rich-quick play. It's not going to give you the same moonshot volatility as a meme token. But what it does give you is exposure to the backbone of the future financial system. And when the world wakes up and realizes that the infrastructure has already been built while they were busy chasing hype, that's when value pours in. Think about it. Bitcoin has become digital gold store of value, hedge against inflation. Ethereum has become the base layer for DeFi and NFTs. Ripple is carving out its niche with banks and financial institutions. And Stellar? Stellar is becoming the universal translator of money. It doesn't care if you're sending dollars, pesos, or stablecoins. It just moves it instantly across the world, like sending a text message. And let me remind you, the future of finance isn't just about Wall Street. It's about Main Street. It's about the billions of people who don't have access to what you and I take for granted. If Stellar captures even a fraction of that $860 billion remittance market, if it becomes the go-to network for stablecoins in emerging economies, if it secures a handful of central bank partnerships, then you're not just holding a coin. You're holding a stake in the infrastructure of the next generation of money. So when I look at Stellar, I don't see hype. I don't see noise. I see quiet, deliberate progress. I see a project that's been around since 2014, yes, almost a decade, and it's still here, still building, still relevant. In a space where 90% of coins vanish within 2 years, that's saying something. Longevity matters. Survival matters. And Stellar has both. Now let's go a little deeper because I want you to see the bigger picture that's unfolding here with Stellar Lumens and why, if you blink, you might miss the train that could define the next decade of finance. Let's be honest with ourselves. Most people aren't early. Most people didn't buy Bitcoin at $100 or Ethereum at $10 or even Solana when it was under $2. Most people ignored them, laughed at them, or assumed they were just internet toys. Then, when these assets ran 100x, suddenly everyone wanted in. That's human psychology. It's hard to believe in something before the world validates it. But here's the kicker. Stellar is sitting in that exact pre-validation stage. It's real. It's working. The adoption is happening. But the spotlight hasn't fully turned on yet. And if history teaches us anything, it's that by the time the spotlight shines, the biggest multiples are gone. Think about this. Back in 2012, when Ripple Labs started making waves about cross-border payments, the banks literally laughed at them. Blockchain is not for finance, they said. Fast forward to today, and Ripple is fighting in US courts, negotiating with central banks, and settling billions in daily volume across corridors like Mexico and the Philippines. The same thing is happening now with Stellar, but with one major difference. Stellar isn't just about working with the big banks. It's also about empowering the unbanked. The World Bank estimates that 1.4 billion adults globally remain unbanked as of 2022. That's not a small number. That's literally a population larger than the entire continent of Africa. And yet, most of them still own a smartphone. Now think about that for a second. They don't have access to a savings account, they can't easily transfer money across borders, but they do have the hardware that can connect them to digital assets instantly. That's the gap Stellar is targeting. And that's the gap that can unlock trillions in economic value. But let's not just talk big numbers. Let's bring it home. Imagine a Nigerian worker in the UK who wants to send money back to his family in Lagos. Right now, if he uses Western Union, he's paying up to 10% in fees, and the money might take days to arrive. If he uses Stellar's Rails through MoneyGram's integration, which is already live, he can send that money in seconds with fees so small they're barely noticeable. That's not just a cost saver. That's a life changer. Now, some of you might be asking, okay, but isn't that exactly what Ripple is doing? Why Stellar? Great question. Ripple has taken the top-down approach. Partner with banks, partner with governments, become the infrastructure for institutions. Stellar has chosen the bottom-up approach. Empower individuals, small businesses, and remittance providers. They're not mutually exclusive. In fact, they complement each other. But it also means Stellar has an angle that could make it more resilient, because it's not waiting on banks to change, it's already changing lives on the ground. Let's zoom out to adoption signals. In 2021, the Stellar Development Foundation announced that MoneyGram, yes, the global remittance giant, was going to integrate with Stellar. That wasn't some backroom pilot. That was a Fortune 500 company deciding that the old rails weren't cutting it anymore. And in 2022, Stellar partnered with Circle to bring USDC, the second largest stablecoin in the world, onto the Stellar blockchain. Pause and think about that. Stablecoins are the backbone of real-world adoption in crypto. Forget speculation, stablecoins are how people actually use this technology daily. They're how you pay your rent, send money to family, or hedge against inflation in countries like Argentina or Turkey. By hosting USDC, Stellar becomes a highway for global money movement. And unlike Ethereum, which sometimes charges $20 per transaction in gas fees, Stellar's fees are fractions of a cent. Now, skeptics will say, but isn't Stellar just a small-cap coin with limited volume? And on the surface, sure, it doesn't have the billions in daily volume like Ethereum. But neither did Ethereum in 2016. Neither did Solana in 2020. The thing about infrastructure plays is they don't look massive until one day they are, and by then, the upside has already happened. Let's back this up with some real-world financial context. The global remittance market was valued at over $794 billion in 2022, according to the World Bank, and is projected to keep growing as migration increases worldwide. If Stellar even captures 5% of that market, that's nearly $40 billion in annual flows through its network. And that's just remittances. That's not counting CBDCs, tokenized assets, or institutional use cases. Speaking of CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, here's where Stellar gets even more interesting. While most people are busy arguing whether the US will issue a digital dollar, Stellar is already working with smaller central banks around the world to test and deploy digital currencies. For example, the National Bank of Ukraine announced a partnership with Stellar in 2021 to build their e-hryvnia project. That's not hypothetical, that's real government-level adoption. And here's what people forget. Smaller nations often move faster with new technology. They don't have the same political gridlock or entrenched interests as the US or the EU. That means while everyone is staring at Washington, Stellar could quietly become the backbone for multiple emerging market digital currencies. By the time the big economies join in, Stellar will already be battle-tested and scaled. Let me throw another analogy at you. Think about mobile payments in Africa. While the West was still swiping plastic cards, countries like Kenya leapfrogged straight into M-Pesa, a mobile money system that transformed the entire economy. Today, More than 96% of households in Kenya use M-Pesa. Why? Because they skipped the card era. They went straight from cash to mobile. That's the same dynamic Stellar is positioning for: skip the old banking rails, go straight to blockchain rails. Now, let's talk psychology for a minute, because investing isn't just about numbers, it's about belief. Most people will dismiss Stellar because it's not hyped in the same way as Solana or Dogecoin. There aren't memes, there aren't daily Twitter battles, it doesn't have the cult community energy. But sometimes that's exactly what you want. Think about Amazon in the early 2000s. Everyone was chasing .com hype stocks, while Amazon quietly built logistics infrastructure. 10 years later, Amazon wasn't just surviving, it was dominating. Stellar feels like that kind of play. Another angle here is regulation. And this is where I think Stellar has a real advantage. The Stellar Development Foundation has been unusually proactive in working with regulators, governments, and NGOs. In fact, Stellar is one of the few blockchain organizations that's a member of the Blockchain Association in Washington, D.C., where it actively lobbies for sensible regulation. That matters because as the SEC continues to crack down on tokens, the projects that have built legitimate bridges with regulators are the ones most likely to survive. And speaking of regulators, let's not ignore the elephant in the room, the SEC itself. When Gary Gensler talks about crypto, he often frames it as a wild west that needs taming. But even he has admitted that blockchain technology has the potential to improve efficiency in payments. Stellar fits perfectly into that narrative. It's not about speculation. It's about solving real-world problems like remittances, settlement, and financial inclusion. Let's also talk about technology for a second. One of Stellar's greatest strengths is its consensus mechanism. Unlike Bitcoin's energy-intensive proof-of-work, Stellar uses a Federated Byzantine Agreement (FBA) model. Without getting too technical, this allows transactions to settle in 3 to 5 seconds with almost no energy consumption. In a world that's increasingly focused on sustainability, that's a big deal. While politicians attack Bitcoin for consuming as much electricity as a small country, Stellar flies under the radar as one of the most eco-friendly blockchains in existence. And that's not just a feel-good feature. It has real business implications. Corporations and governments are under pressure to meet ESG, environmental, social, and governance goals. If you're a central bank or a Fortune 500 company, do you really want to build your financial infrastructure on an energy hog? Or do you want a green, efficient, scalable system like Stellar? So let's pause and recap where we're at. Stellar is already powering real remittance corridors with partners like MoneyGram. It's hosting stablecoins like USDC, enabling cheap, instant global payments. It's working with central banks on CBDCs. It's green, fast, and scalable. It's aligned with regulators instead of fighting them. And it's trading at a fraction of the market cap of its peers. To me, that paints a picture of asymmetric opportunity. The downside? Sure, maybe Stellar never breaks through, maybe adoption stalls. But the upside? If even a fraction of these bets play out, you're looking at one of the most underpriced assets in crypto right now. So if you're sitting here watching Stellar at 10 cents and wondering why it's not $5 yet, zoom out. Ask yourself, is adoption moving forward? Are partnerships being built? Is the utility getting stronger? If the answer is yes, then the short-term price is just noise. The real game is in the patience to ride adoption until the market psychology flips. And here's the last thing on psychology. Capitulation. That moment when people throw in the towel. It happens every cycle. In stocks, in housing, in crypto. People can handle a dip. They can handle sideways. But when it's months or years of grind, they break. They sell the bottom. They give up. And ironically, that's exactly when the market sets the foundation for the next rally. In 2009, U.S. housing markets were in shambles. People walked away from homes. Banks were repossessing left and right. And yet, if you bought then, when psychology was at its lowest, you made life-changing returns. Same with the Nasdaq in 2002. Same with Bitcoin in 2018. Same with Stellar now. So let me leave you with this thought. Adoption doesn't care about your emotions. The market doesn't care about your feelings. Price is just the reflection of the crowd's mood in the moment. But adoption, the slow, steady build of real-world usage, eventually forces price to catch up. And those who understand this, who learn to ride out the waves of psychology, are the ones who end up on the winning side. And here's where Stellar shines. Look at the partnerships, the pilot programs, the money transfer services already being built on it. These are small steps in the grand scheme, but they're foundational. They're not hype. They're infrastructure. It's like watching the internet in 1995. You didn't have YouTube or Instagram yet, but you had the pipes being laid down, the ISPs setting up connections, and the protocols being standardized. That groundwork is what later allowed the giants to emerge. Now, I'm not saying Stellar will follow Bitcoin's exact trajectory. Different assets, different use cases, but the psychology is the same. Right now, the average investor doesn't care about Stellar. It's not trending on social media every day, it's not being hyped on CNBC, and it's not the kind of token that influencers are pumping for quick gains. But that's exactly why this is an interesting phase. Because when the crowd isn't paying attention, adoption is quietly increasing. So the outlook is this: expect volatility, expect fear, expect impatience in the short term, but also expect adoption to grow steadily behind the scenes. And when those two realities collide, the psychology of the market meeting the reality of adoption, that's when price action can truly explode. If you've followed me through this journey, you'll see a pattern emerge. Markets don't move just on fundamentals, and they don't move just on hype. They move on the interaction between psychology and adoption. Stellar's price today reflects that tug of war. On one hand, you've got traders chasing short-term moves, flipping in and out based on fear and greed. On the other hand, you've got builders, institutions, and long-term investors who see the bigger picture of cross-border payments and real-world utility. The lesson is simple but not easy. Patience wins. Not blind patience, but informed patience. Patience that understands the difference between noise and signal. Patience that can withstand the pain of market downturns because you've studied history and you know adoption doesn't happen overnight. And as you watch this space, remember that adoption doesn't shout. It whispers. It shows up in pilot programs, in regulatory approvals, in partnerships that don't make headlines today but will matter tomorrow. By the time the mainstream realizes what's happening, it'll be too late to get in at the ground floor. So stay informed, stay patient, understand the psychology of markets, watch adoption carefully, and above all, don't underestimate the power of time. Because in the end, price is just psychology catching up to reality. That's the game. And if you play it with clarity and conviction, you're not just speculating, you're positioning yourself for the future.